So, Asha, will the legal profession survive the second Trump presidency?
Eh, it's complicated. I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm a legal contributor for ABC News.
And I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down into a soundbite or a skit.
Wow.
I know it's hard now for our listeners. Every week we're like, what are we going to talk about? Because we don't want to do insanity potpourri every week, but it is sort of insanity potpourri every week. And so finding a common thread that sort of ties a lot of the crazy together and gives us a bigger way to think about it, I think is going to become increasingly important.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of things that in an ordinary news cycle would be just insane, right? Like the U.S. attorney threatening to investigate Georgetown University for their viewpoints and prevent any of their graduates to be hired, or everything that happened that addressed the Congress. There's so much that's going on, right? There's so many legal issues, but I think something that really stood out to me this week, I'm on the planning committee and attended the ABA White Collar Conference. We talked, Asha, about the American Bar Association and its statement in support of the rule of law. And wow, it was almost like a funeral there this week of lawyers worried about the potential death of the legal profession. And there's so many reasons why, and a lot of those came to a head this week.
Yeah, we always hear the quote, the Shakespeare quote, the first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers. And it's usually understood to be a jab at lawyers. But in the context of the play, the speaker, Dick the Butcher, is basically saying lawyers are what's standing between us and tyranny. So we have to get rid of them. We have to get rid of the rule of law if we're going to be able to, do whatever we want. And I think that that's a lesson that the Trump administration seems to understand very well. And I think it's a good lens through which to understand not only the assault on the rule of law, but on the legal profession and all of these different ways that we can unpack as sort of a cohesive theme.
So I think that's very well said, Asha. And I think if there's one move by Trump that sort of is the tip of the spear, the atomic bomb in this, it is the executive order that came out while I was at that conference this week, targeting a law firm called Perkins Coie. And you may not know this law firm. It's just a big law firm, sort of like the one that I'm a partner at and the one that many lawyers practice at. But one thing that you may not know about this law firm is this was the law firm that was doing work for the Democratic National Committee back during the election of 2016 and had was involved in that dossier that was at the core of the Russia investigation, one that Trump got very upset about, and seemingly because Trump is still worked up about that. Many years later, 9 years later, he issued an executive order targeting that law firm and saying that current employees of that law firm, who, by the way, many of whom probably didn't work there in 2016, cannot even enter federal buildings. So that means they can't go to court. They can't visit the SEC if they have a meeting there, or the DOJ. He's effectively trying to put them out of business and suggesting that he will be investigating Perkins Coie, and the government will be investigating other law firms as well. And it was really it really was a punctuation of a campaign to, I would say, bully and silence critics, and to send a message that if you act against Trump or you contribute to people who are against Trump, you will be targeted. And I think it took it to a degree that we had not seen before. In other words, it wasn't just revoking a security clearance for 2 or 3 people. It was targeting an entire firm because of the actions of people who, by the way, aren't even there anymore, like Mark Elias, 9 years ago.
I have two things to say about that. The first is that executive order came after Trump actually took action against another law firm, a white shoe law firm called Covington and Burling, that was helping former special counsel Jack Smith in his investigation. And Trump stripped the lawyers who worked at that firm or worked on that case. I'm not sure how broad it was, but he revoked their security clearances, which, again, as you point out, affects the kinds of cases that they can work on and what they can do. I think with regard to the executive order, part of the reason that we haven't ever seen something like that before seems a little unconstitutional. Like
Oh, totally.
it looked like a what's called a bill of attainder to me.
Wow, that's one of many ways in which it's unconstitutional, because it also, I mean, it's they have a right to petition the government. You would think, so they should be able to go into federal buildings to do that. They have a right to associate with one another. So just because Mark Elias did something doesn't mean that somebody who happens to associate with him, or associated with people who associated with him. So there's all sorts of problems here, right?
Yes. I think there's a lot of problems, the bill of attainder being one of them. And just for people who are unaware, a bill of attainder is basically a law that targets someone and specifically and declares them guilty of a crime and, institutes some sort of punishment without any kind of due process. And I think I think it was normally understood to be laws like passed by Congress, but I mean, I think the executive order would count.
Yeah, it may, whether it does or doesn't, it's unconstitutional in so many other respects that it's like an issue. It's like one of these law school exams where people could get all sorts of legal violations, and your job is to sort of locate how many you do. It's like one of those, like when you were at the doctor's office and you had to find all of the hidden figures.
The issue spotter.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, but to me, Asha, that was just taking what was already there and sort of amping it up, right? You mentioned Covington and Burling. Yes, that was more targeted. Obviously, it wasn't as sweeping. It wasn't like there's an executive order saying, Covington and Burling is an enemy of the state, essentially. But even before that, at this conference, there were other things that were underneath the surface. And the reason I'm bringing up this conference, it actually made the news that that is a conference that senior leadership in the administration come to every year. The DOJ speaks. For example, last year, Merrick Garland gave an address. The Attorney General of the United States at that conference, and there were many Trump administration officials who were scheduled to appear. They all canceled.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
There's only 2 who showed up. I'll give them credit. I will shout out here. The CFTC Director of Enforcement came. I think it was very challenging for him to find a way to accomplish that. And the SEC Acting Director of Enforcement came, I think, on her own dime. I think she spent her own dollars to come. They were the only ones who came, but a lot of administration officials from Todd Blanche on down canceled at the very last minute.
And I just wanted to clarify the backdrop against which this is all taking place, which is on February 10th. I think we mentioned this on the podcast that week. The president of the American Bar Association, William B. Ray, put out a statement. This was kind of right when Musk started, acting crazy in the executive branch. And it was a very strong statement, basically upholding the rule of law and saying that there are certain ways that you can implement policy changes and policy preferences, and what we're seeing is not one of them. And really appealing to larger democratic principles over party to make that case. I mean, he doesn't mention Trump. He doesn't, mention any of the parties, but obviously that, has put the ABA, I guess, the American Bar Association, on the, I don't know if they're officially on the enemies list, but they are certainly on some kind of unofficial enemies list. And I think we talked about when that statement came out, we could potentially expect to see other kinds of retaliatory action. So the ABA, for example, is given authority to accredit law schools. They could take that away from them, perhaps. Put that in the hands of, I don't know, some Trump loyalist, I guess. So the fact that they did that, I think, is why these government officials were banned, I'm assuming, from being able to attend.
So I think you're right, Asha. In fact, Bill, the president of the American Bar Association, actually released another statement after the Covington and Burling incident, essentially in solidarity of Covington and Burling, and really telling people that they should be standing up for the legal profession more generally. And Trump's response to that was essentially to go over the top, so to speak, and basically have a full broadside against Perkins Coie. And just to give people a sense, in this conference that we were holding with 1,000+ lawyers in attendance is usually a spot where people are thinking about, okay, what are the new trends that are coming in government enforcement, and what are the issues that the whatever the current administration is focused on, what agencies are doing, and so on and so forth. Instead, the entire conference up till that point was focused on the issues of this podcast. Will there even be government enforcement going forward? Will there be a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act that's enforced? Will there be white collar criminal cases? Will the SEC continue to police the financial markets after reports that many of its field offices are being shut down? Chicago office, for example, the San Francisco office, and many others are just being shuttered, despite having long-term leases. Basically, they're just breaking their leases and telling everyone they have to work from home. So, we have an FBI director, of course. It's dismantling the FBI that we've discussed. So, I think right now, I think a lot of people in the legal profession are understandably concerned, because if we don't have a government that is doing things, and if we don't have laws and rules that matter, what is the point of a legal profession? If you're not helping people navigate laws and rules, then really it's all about grift.
No, I agree completely. And it's not just the law firms either, Renato. We saw also that our favorite recurring character on this podcast, interim DC U.S. Attorney Ed Martin, sent a letter to Georgetown Law School, Georgetown Law Center, as it's called, right? Not university.
Yep.
Yeah. Basically saying that he would not be hiring people from Georgetown because of DEI or DEI initiatives, or until they abandoned it. I mean, it was sort of this trying to use this leverage. And the dean of Georgetown Law Center pushed back pretty hard on that.
He did, because, as he noted, it's unconstitutional viewpoint discrimination. You actually, if Georgetown is a Jesuit university, it's a private institution, and if they, discriminating against its graduates because they support diversity or inclusion is unconstitutional.
Seems to be a running theme.
Indeed.
Though, I have to say, I am surprised that there has not been more of a unified statement coming from law schools and law school deans generally. It took a few weeks after January 6th, but the law school deans did issue a joint statement about the rule of law. But it seems like they've been very tepid in this last month or so. And I really expected, them to be the leaders in this, because really it is an assault on the rule of law, and they are essentially the gatekeepers of the legal profession. I used to be the dean of admissions at Yale Law School, so I would think that this is fully and squarely in the mission of law schools to speak up, especially after the ABA kind of took the step of laying out that this is a part of lawyers' professional responsibility.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and it's funny because unlike law firms, which are at their core profit making enterprises, just like companies, responsible to the people who are relying on them for income and so forth. Law schools are not for profit organizations, ostensibly. But it's interesting, Asha. I really think there's a lot of people at law firms, at law schools, and others throughout the legal profession who are worried about being targets and worried about what will happen to their institutions, their jobs, their, in this case, students, and so forth. And so I do think there's been an element to which it's been working in the short run for Trump. I wonder in the long run, though, because Trump is breaking so many things so quickly that it's hurting the markets, right? Stock market's down. He's starting to talk about targeting various companies and so forth. And I think he's stirring up a hornet's nest that may end up hurting the Republican Party before the midterms.
So I want to rewind because I don't want to let the law schools off the hook so easily. I mean, I think it's true that there could be some law schools that are afraid of the retaliation and what could happen, but I do think, having worked in one, that the top law schools do have both a moral responsibility and I think have the resources to withstand uh, retaliatory measures in a way that, maybe some of the, other smaller law schools might not be able to. So I'm sorry. I'm like, if you can stand up and, withdraw yourself from the US news rankings, take a big stand there, which I'm glad, that, for example, Yale Law School took the lead in doing that. I think that I'm speaking as an alumna right now. I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, I'll tell you how I feel. First of all, I thought that was a lot much ado about nothing withdrawing from the rankings. I thought that was kind of silly. Personal view. I get that. I mean, private organizations have their rankings, and I get that they've had an undue influence. But it's like, of all the things that Yale Law School should be taking a stand on, like it struck me as like whatever. There's so much going on in our world that they could be focused on. I agree. So in a sense, I agree with you. And then, so I wasn't as enthusiastic about that. But I would be more enthusiastic if Yale Law School was saying, okay, our clinic is going to focus on helping people who are being targeted by the administration. Um,
And I
and
think there are. So, I understand that there are some clinics that are helping federal employees who have been let go. There is actually a
yes,
rule of law clinic at the law school. So I don't want to conflate those two things. That's different than the institution speaking.
that's fair. That's fair. I think there is, for example, there's some great work being done for military folks at Yale Law School as well. And the Georgetown Law Center is helping some people who are targeted. But my point being is that the law schools could be in the legal profession leaders more generally. And I don't feel like they have been on a number of these topics. And I think it's because, and this is I'll take it, maybe this is, you disagree, we'll see whether we disagree. I think that these big law schools are in many ways like companies, even though they're not for profits, and they're interested in getting donors and pleasing alumni and so forth. And so that's what this is about. They don't want to be too controversial and shake things up. And no one wants to stick their neck out unless everyone is at the same time. There's a collective action problem, the same way there is, I think, with law firms to an even greater extent.
Well, I think that's pretty sad. I will say that the third prong of this assault on the rule of law looks like it might even be starting to go after or maybe subvert the bar associations themselves. I know that I think Ed Martin and U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi, or maybe her brother. I don't remember. Somebody, they are trying to get on the board of the DC bar. Now, bar disciplinary committees are usually separate committees than the actual, head of the leadership of the bar associations themselves. But I should say that bar discipline is one way to, stop some of what the Trump administration is doing, particularly when they're acting in bad faith, or if lawyers are going in and representing things falsely to the courts. We saw after January 6th, after the litigation in January 6th, that there were a number of attorneys who got disbarred or suspended from practicing. So it's especially important now. And it's interesting that we're talking about this as sort of like this frontier where there's sort of a battle being waged, because it connects to how autocracies are formed in the modern era. As you know from our colleagues Ruth Ben-Ghiat and other scholars, it's not tanks rolling in the streets anymore. This isn't, the military coups of Latin America or something. They're legal autocracies where often things are subverted using the legal means, and electoral processes, and then essentially become a paper democracy. They look democratic. They look like they have elections. They look like they have laws and law enforcement, but it's not really functioning the way that it should, which is partly why you're saying, Renato, that lawyers are worried that they're not going to actually have actual work to do. But it does help us understand why it's so important for them to either neutralize or punish lawyers, because that is actually, the courtrooms are where, and the legal process and the policymaking process is really where the subversion is happening.
That's right. We've talked a lot in this podcast over the last few weeks about various lawsuits that are being brought to try to stop the Trump administration. And it's notable, you mentioned the Georgetown letter. Another notable thing that happened this week was U.S. AID, the USAID lawsuits. The Trump administration had a loss there. There was another lawsuit in which a number of employees were basically brought back onto the federal pay, or brought back to work because they were discharged unlawfully. And so the legal system is in fact a way in which Trump can be held accountable. And it's also notable, by the way, that address that I referenced very briefly in this episode that Trump had before Congress. One of the more notable lines was when Trump said that Musk was the head of Doge, and that suddenly appeared in all these court filings, because in court where facts matter, the government said no. Musk has no decision-making authority. So the point I'm making, Asha, is that the legal system is a tool that can constrain Trump. And by what he's trying to do is use what I'm going to call soft power, in a way, to influence and cower people from participating. And so the idea is, these lawsuits are not being brought by the Perkins Coie's of the world. They're being brought by a lot of fantastic lawyers at smaller firms and by nonprofit organizations and so on. And he's basically trying to warn away law firms and say, don't participate, don't be part of this. And it's very dangerous. And realistically, there is what I said, a collective action problem. What I mean by that being that there's a sense where it's like, well, they're targeting someone else. And, is it better to just keep your head down, or does everyone need to band together and trying to get everyone working together? And that was what the ABA was trying to do, to collectively say that. And I think it's going to take some bravery, but also potentially some coordination at a certain point, whether it's legal or not, I don't know, to try to push back.
Yeah, I think it is going to backfire at some point. Lawyers as a group are socialized and trained to, to serve to act in service of higher principles, right? I mean, this is sort of goes back to John Adams defending the British soldiers in the Boston Massacre and things. It's this idea that everyone's entitled to certain kinds of rights and processes. So I think that they might be cowering now. We saw a little bit of something like this post 9/11. I don't know if you remember, but in the immediate post 9/11 years, so probably in the first, I would say, like 2 to 3 years, no law firm and no lawyer wanted to touch these Gitmo cases because
Right.
there was so much, they felt like they would lose so much political capital. I mean, I don't think the W administration was actually targeting and threatening them in the same way that the Trump administration is doing now, but I think they were still looking out for their own bottom line in the same way. They didn't want to lose clients who are like, "Hey, you're helping terrorists," or whatever. And it took time for people to suddenly start souring on President Bush's war on terror. And then those became like everybody was representing these people. And these became like kind of the kinds of cases that law students wanted to go to firms where they could do pro bono work on these kinds of, detainees at Guantanamo Bay. I'm hoping that it won't take 2 or 3 years in this case. I think in the Bush administration, a lot of that was happening. It was so opaque what was happening, with the detainees and post 9/11. This is not so opaque. And as you said, this is going to eventually, PS, start hurting these law partners' portfolios. I bet you they'll care about that. So, I think that the pendulum is going to swing both because of, how I think lawyers as the legal profession as an institution, how lawyers are trained, and then also it's just going to be in their own interest too.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I agree with what you said, and I think that, as you point out, lawyers themselves are being harmed by this. In one respect, as you said, yes, their pocketbooks are going to be hurt. Certainly, the markets are not doing well for Trump. I alluded to that earlier. That impacts the clients of these lawyers who aren't going to be happy either. There's not a lot of economic activity right now. It's not like there's all sorts of mergers and acquisitions and deals and this, that. It's that activity's down and the stock market's down because of all the uncertainty caused by Trump and the tariffs and everything else. But separately, lawyers have to really think for themselves in a system. What do they provide? What value do they provide? Well, they counsel people regarding how to follow laws and regulations. They help represent people in court who sometimes have controversial views or do foolish things or have problems of serious kinds. And that's precisely just like John Adams did for British soldiers, or John Quincy Adams did, representing people who are unpopular at the time and needed legal representation. And so, I mentioned and alluded to some of the conversations that were occurring, but I at the same conference that I was at, I talked to a partner, Perkins Coie, before that before that order came out, who was concerned because like I said, as a former SEC alum, where is he going to be? Who's he going to be petitioning? Who's he going to be talking to even before this order? Because everything's getting dismantled. And I think lawyers have to be concerned themselves as a profession about where the law is going right now.
It's funny. I actually had this conversation the other day with someone about the novel Station 11. Do you know this novel? It was
No.
actually written before the pandemic. But basically, a global pandemic hits, the world, and 95% of the population like drops dead in like 3 days.
Wow.
So, society just descends into whatever, like tribal lawlessness. And it's really interesting because the thing that I thought of as I was reading that, because there's like no rule of law and there's just like tribes and everybody's out for, what they can get, that lawyers are pretty useless in any kind of system where there is no kind of organizing functional government, where it's, where you have actual things to negotiate or try to litigate. And so, yeah. And if that's what we're descending into right now, is just basically, Trump and Ed Martin and Kash Patel get to decide, like, how spoils are distributed, that's just a bad day for lawyers. Then not much room for them there.
Right. I mean, I personally have spent tens of thousands of hours over the course, probably hundreds of thousands over the course of my life, practicing and learning all sorts of skills that are valuable in this system that we have, right? Courtroom skills and advocacy skills and knowledge of all sorts of laws and rules and this and that. If all it comes down to is like who knows somebody in the Trump administration, then obviously all of that's worthless. And that's the case for lots of people. Um, and so, spending time, I will say it was, very interesting to see because me and you spent a lot of time thinking about these issues. We're very concerned about them, but talking to people who suddenly realize like, oh my goodness, my career may be short lived. Talking to people who are like, oh my, like, I suddenly don't have a job. I talked to a lot of former federal employees there. It was very stark to see real consequences in 45 days or whatever it's been, less than 50 days, that Trump has been the president again.
Well, he might be poking a hornet's nest when
Yeah,
you start messing with the lawyers.
indeed.
So before we go, Renato, we're not doing a second block because I'm running around and I need to get my malaria meds.
What?
Yes,
Malaria?
because I'm headed to Kenya on
That's
Sunday.
amazing. You have such an amazing life, Asha. I swear, like every month you're going someplace super awesome, fancy place. Okay, Kenya's amazing. So where are you? Is this
Wait,
like,
have
are
you
you?
been?
No, but are you? But I mean, it's like a place everyone would want to go. So are you like roughing it, or are you in like some fancy?
Oh,
Is this glamping?
no, I am definitely not roughing it. So
Okay.
I'm going there partially for work.
What for
I'm
work?
Yes,
Where?
yes. I'm
What is this, like
doing
National
I'm
Geographic?
doing
What?
I'm doing brand awareness for, the Jackson School where I work, and I'm meeting with
Wow.
some government and university partners and contacts, and I'm going to be speaking and presenting at the Yale Model African Union Conference, which is taking place in Nairobi. So that's all going to be
Wow.
super fun. And then I'm going on a 4-day safari.
That's awesome. Is it like a fancy safari?
Yeah, so this
I
safari
figured,
this
knowing you.
safari had 3 different options. It had economy, comfort, and luxury,
And
and
you're all luxury.
I totally picked luxury.
Okay, of
Like,
course.
you're, like, sleeping outdoors. I'm sorry, like, I'm a glamping kinda gal. So,
So what does this mean? What's
I don't really
luxury?
know. I mean, I just figured luxury is gonna be there was actually one on top of that. It was, like, super luxury, and
Okay.
I was like, "I'm gonna see if I can make it with luxury."
How
Uh
luxury can camping get? I mean, I guess you like drink champagne as you're
I
watching
have no idea.
them cook you hot dogs or
I
something?
have no idea. Um, but I think that the lodge that I'm staying at looks pretty nice.
The lodge?
The lodge, and there are game drives every day, and I think I'm gonna pull the trigger and do a hot air balloon ride.
Oh, now that'll be spectacular.
Now
That's cool.
it did freak me out a little bit because I had to do some research, but according to the FAA, hot air balloons are the safest form of air travel.
No kidding.
Yeah. You actually have to
Wow.
get a license. Like, you have to be a pilot.
I had no idea. I
Yes.
would never have guessed that would be safe because it's just like a basket and
That's why
a
it's like a wicker basket and like a frame and like cloth. And I was like, I don't know, like, does this, or what if you like, you just keep going and sail away into, like an, uh,
the ocean or something.
right,
Yes.
like Wizard of Oz kind of thing. Um, but people who have done hot air balloons have assured me that it's pretty safe, I think.
Wow. Well, I hope you come back because this podcast would be really boring if you didn't. But that sounds like a hell of a lot of fun. So I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to hearing the
I'm
stories when
I'm
you get
just
back.
looking forward to getting away and having some perspective, and it'll be interesting to see, what how people are kind of processing everything outside of here. So who knows? Maybe I'll ask the pilot to not land the hot air balloon, and I will just float away, and you won't see me again.
There you go. Asha Rangappa, citizen of the world. You'll be among the stars. No, that's great. Have a good time, and I look forward to hearing about it and seeing photos when you get back.
Thanks.